So we are in week number 3, right?
Yep.
I'm counting that right. Week number 3 of going through all of the best Vikings to wear each jersey number. So we're in kind of the quiet part of the NFL offseason.
Hopefully quiet.
Hopefully quiet, yes.
If we're talking about our team on anything other than a guard roster battle and a potential RB3 signing and how the salary cap works, if we're talking about those things, that's fine. But if we're in July and we're talking about major news stories of our teams, it's probably not good. There's one way it could be good, like they re-sign a big name player, but usually it's, oh, this player got arrested, or oh, somebody's holding out and CeeDee Lamb is not going to come to training camp unless he gets a new contract, stuff like that. That's when you don't want to be talking about your team in July. So right now, the Vikings, knock on the Skol man center, knock on wood, the Vikings don't have anything crazy like that going on.
Yeah, and so we've been going through each of the best Vikings to wear each jersey number. So we started a few weeks ago with jersey numbers 0 through 19. Yep. Last week we recapped
20 to 39.
20 to 39, and so this week we're going to hit 40 to 59. We've got a few more weeks to go in the series after that to kind of round out all 100 jersey numbers.
Yeah.
We're trying to tackle them 20 at a time over the course of 5 episodes.
Yeah. So we did mention the 30s specifically was a group of numbers where there weren't a lot of heavy hitters. Some historic Viking names that were definitely worthy of being talked about, and maybe it was good because I heard some names I'd never heard before, but they were pretty good. And there's some of those names sprinkled here in this list that we're going to talk about today. But yeah, the 30s are a number range that if you're an up-and-coming player, you want to make your mark, you want to own a number, maybe get it retired for you. Pick like 38 or 37, you know. But there's some numbers in the 40s and even the 50s too that you could really own it if you're an up-and-coming Viking and you want to be the best of all time to wear that number for that team. There's some opportunities. So
for sure. And I texted you earlier today.
Oh, yeah.
I sent you an article from operations.nfl.com where they explain kind of the new layout for jersey numbers and which positions can wear each one. So I thought it might be interesting to just really quickly recap that.
Yeah, because they changed the rules up twice in the last 3 or 4 years. So.
Yeah. So for the longest time, and actually this article has the history of it. There was another article too that I found. I don't know if I have that readily available, but anyways, for the longest time it was very specific. These positions could wear these numbers and only these numbers, and it was pretty restrictive. And it wasn't until the 2000s that they started to kind of open things up a little bit. And then last year they really opened up a lot of things and made most numbers available to most players.
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part. So quarterbacks are one of the most restricted positions. Quarterbacks can wear anything from 0 to 19. That's it. Punters and kickers have everything from 0 to 49 and then 90 to 99. So they've got 60 numbers at their disposal. Defensive backs can wear 0 to 49. Running backs, fullbacks, halfbacks can wear 0 to 49 or 80 to 89. Tight ends and wide receivers are in that same category. So basically if you're a running back, tight end, or receiver,
you can almost wear every number.
You can wear pretty much anything other than 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah, the offensive lineman-ish numbers. Yeah,
and those are the offensive lineman and defensive lineman numbers. So offensive linemen can only wear 50 through 79. Defensive linemen can also wear 50 through 79 or 90 to 99. And then you have linebackers that basically have the full gamut of numbers other than the offensive lineman numbers.
Yeah. I'm remembering, I think it was Sheldon Rankins from a few years ago on the Vikings. In the preseason, he wore number 9. He's a defensive tackle and a large one. And in the preseason, he wore number 9, but that there must be different preseason rules too, because he was allowed to for those 3 or 4 games at the time.
He'd have to wear 50 to 79 or 90 to 99.
Yeah,
now.
and I think he switched to like 90 or something like that. I don't remember, but that was a few years ago, obviously before they changed all these rules. But needless to say, before 2 or 3 years ago, like running backs and wide receivers and linebackers, they were pretty restricted on the number range they could wear, but now they're pretty wide open. And even kickers, they got pretty wide open as well, with the new rules. So if you remember Reggie Bush, his USC days, he wore number 5, and it was kind of a big deal. He couldn't wear number 5 with the Saints when he got drafted because it wasn't allowed at the time. But now, I mean, Alex Madison wore number 2 for the Vikings last year.
Yep.
I think Brian Asamoah, he's going to wear number 2 for the Vikings this year, so assuming he makes a team. But yeah, all that to say, this exact segment in like 20 years will look a lot different, because the numbers we're going to talk about today, there's a lot of defensive backs, a few linebackers, and like a couple of running backs that are on this list of best to wear for the Vikings. But this range could definitely change. Yeah,
for sure. And I could see somebody wanting some of these numbers in the future.
Yeah. All right, so the best number 40 in Vikings history. I went through, I kind of cheated for us a little bit. I went to profootballreference.com, and they kind of rank players with an approximate value number, and they explain how they get that number on their site. I've read it before. I don't exactly remember. I just know it's like an aggregation of their stats and awards they've earned in their career, kind of gives them like a number that's usually 1 to 100. Occasionally you see some guys reach above 100. But yeah, so what I did is I took all these players, I looked up Vikings to wear each number we're going to talk about, and I filtered the list of each number by their highest approximate value. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll see if we remember any other players to wear that number for the Vikings.
Sounds good.
All right, so number 40, I think without looking at this list, you and I would both say something like Jim Kleinsasser, Ivan Pace.
Jim Kleinsasser and Ivan Pace. Yeah, both of them come to mind.
But I mean,
for sure.
Even Red Ellison, he was good for a couple years for the Vikings. There was a player, Charlie West, from 68 to 73, who has a higher approximate value score of 24 than anyone else in Vikings history. So a defensive back, Charlie West, I guess he is the best Viking to wear number 40.
And he was a pretty good punt returner and kick returner. He had, so yeah, he played way before our time in the early days of the Vikings, and in arguably some of the more successful years of the Vikings. He was a Viking for 6 years, from 68 to 73, before he went to Detroit. And then he ended his career in Denver. But his rookie season in 68, he had the longest punt return in the NFL of 98 yards.
Holy cow.
And then
in 1960, that's crazy for that time too.
The following year, his sophomore campaign, he had the most punt returns in the league, 39.
Which might say some good things about the defense in 69. So
there you go. So yeah, Charlie West, best to wear number 40.
Yeah. All right, number 41 was a running back by the name of Dave Osborne with an AV, or approximate value, of 56. He played for the Vikings for 11 years, from 65 to 75.
Yeah, and I've heard his name quite a bit. Really good running back. Obviously, way before our time. He spent most of his career in Minnesota before going to the Packers for one season at the end of his career. So that's kind of interesting.
The next best, according to Pro Football Reference, 41, is Anthony Harris, who really only had one good year with the Vikings.
But he was a good defensive back.
He was decent.
He had 6 picks in 2019.
And that earned him a franchise tag. And then he never did anything after those 6 picks.
That's true.
Yeah, flashy year. I'm sure he's a good dude, but fizzled out real quick.
He had a lot of tackles. He was a tackle machine, it looks like, in 2020. But yeah. Not near the defensive back that he was in terms of interceptions and whatnot in 2019.
Yep.
That was COVID too. It was kind of a weird time.
Weird year. All right, number 42. Who do we got here?
Well, you have on the list that we've created here John Gilliam, 72 to 75. I'm thinking Andrew DePaula right now.
Right now, absolutely.
Long snapper.
Gilliam, though, was a wide receiver to wear number 42.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. What were some of his stats? Let's look at those quick.
Well, Minnesota's one stop along the way of his career, although I think he was the one that he only played 4 years with the Vikings, and he made 4 Pro Bowls in his career, and they were the only years he was with the Vikings. So his best years of his career were with the Vikings. So it makes sense. Also, I don't know how that AV number works. I assume that approximate value is like of their whole career. So there's a chance some of these guys played not as good with the Vikings, but then moved on and played better somewhere else. So that's kind of a little asterisk on this list here.
The best season of his career receiving wise was 72, his first year with the Vikings.
Yeah.
1,000 yards, 22 yards per catch, 7 touchdowns. He had 8 touchdowns the following year, and he had 9 touchdowns one year with St. Louis in 69. So not the most touchdowns of his career, but arguably one of the better years of his career. Started every game. So, yeah, pretty good wide receiver, just a little bit before our time.
And the Vikings were his third team, too. So that's kind of interesting. You don't see... I feel like the league changes, too. So if you're on your third team, usually you're not about to make your first Pro Bowl. Usually that's just a series of one-year deals, and then you fizzle out.
But, I mean, back in the 70s, I think the NFL was just a little bit different, too, in terms of how that played out. Some other interesting and notable 42s from our era, for sure. You got Ben Gedeon.
Oh, yeah, linebacker. He came in because they changed up the rules for linebackers at one point. For a while, they couldn't wear anything lower than number 50. But then I think right when he came in, Ben Gedeon, they changed it to open up all the 40s for all the linebackers, too. So he was probably one of the first Vikings linebackers to wear 42.
You also got Darren Sharper, who came over from the Packers.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that guy.
But still a decent player in his own right.
Yeah, did a lot of noteworthy things in his free life. Now, I don't think... I would imagine he's still in jail. I think he got quite a hefty sentence for his transgressions there. But yeah, that was 42. Anyone else? Jerome Felton. He was kind of fun for a couple of years as a fullback.
Yeah. Orlando Thomas.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Late 90s, early 2000s. And Andrew DePaula, although his average value is quite low.
He's a long snapper, but he is an all-pro.
I would say, he's valuable. You want a good guy snapping the ball in those situations on punts and field goals and extra points.
Absolutely. So. He's kind of the long snapper position. I'm trying to say this the way I mean it, because I mean it to be very, very complimentary of that position. But it's one of those, it's kind of like the pinky toe. You don't think about it too often.
Yep.
But if you have a bad one, it can ruin your life. If you've ever had like a broken pinky toe nail or something, or even a broken pinky toe, it's the only thing you can think about. It's the worst ever. But if your pinky toes are good, one of my phrases I say all the time is I'd rather have my pinky toe chopped off than what did I just say earlier before we started recording? I'd rather have than a bug flying in my nose. That's what I said. And probably pretty crazy because the pinky toe is very important. So the long snapper is very important. If you have a good one, or even just a regular okay one, you don't care because they're doing their job. But the second you have a guy that can't snap the ball to the holder, you can lose games off that. So DePaula, please keep playing as long as you're good. And I don't care if you're 70 years old. If you're good, keep playing. We like you.
All right, moving on to number 43.
Yeah.
I forgot about this, and I think he's changed numbers since then. He's not the best yet. Could be, maybe. Cam Bynum.
Yeah.
or that number for a couple seasons.
Yeah, I think he was 43 at least his first year. Yeah, I think just his first season in 2021. That dude is on the rise. I first really got to know him when he was on Ben Lieber's podcast a few years ago. It was like right after his first season. He seems like a great dude. He's another one the Vikings have had no issues putting out in front of the media and kind of highlighting and talking about. I think a big story of his from a year or two ago was his wife had some issues with her visa. She was couldn't get to the U.S. or move to the U.S. She was in the Philippines, I believe. I think that's all figured out now. But yeah, he's a good player on the field, and one of the reasons Lewis Cine can't get on the field. So keep being good there, Cam.
Yeah, for sure. Nate Wright, though, from 1971 to 1980, he has the highest AV of anybody to wear the number 43.
For the Vikings, yeah. So this kind of reminds me to say, like, if we have any listeners that were fans, or even if you're a kid, and you remember some of these names, obviously these were guys that were good. It's just Evan and I were born in the early 90s, so we weren't even awake to the Vikings until at least the mid to late 90s. So a lot of these really cool and really good players that mean a lot to the team, we have no idea who they are. Nate Wright, who had a lot of stats, played a lot of 10 years for the Vikings.
Yeah.
129 games. How many? 31 interceptions just in Minnesota. Like, that's a good dude, and we would love to sit and reminisce about, how awesome Nate Wright was. We just weren't alive then. So let us know. How do you feel about these guys that were in the 60s and 70s and 80s, We want to hear your thoughts of watching them on TV or hearing them on the radio.
And we've got good stats here, like Pro Football Reference, where we can kind of get a glimpse into the past a little bit. And we can see Nate Wright, for example, had 31 picks for the Vikings. Unfortunately, none of those were touchdowns, but 31 interceptions is nothing to scoff at. Like,
yeah. That's almost as much as Harrison Smith.
Like, that's awesome.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So, and a handful of fumble recoveries along the way as well, and one touchdown in that, right? Looks like. So yeah, all in all, Nate Wright, good defensive back.
Yeah,
and arguably the best to wear number 43.
44 is a fun number for the Vikings. We got a few names. We got Matt Asiata. Asiata.
That dude was fun to watch.
He was just a hammer. He was never the home run hitter, but he would just punch your way through. I think I've mentioned this even recently on the podcast. He had the game where he had like 30 rushes for 50 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yep. Like, the yardage doesn't really blow your mind away, especially when you think about he had, almost a little bit better than a yard per rush, but 3 touchdowns, like, that guy's just a hammer. And he's got a good story too. I think he was working in like a warehouse and then got a phone call to come try out for the Vikings. But Matt Asiata was good. Josh Metellus right now, who just clone him 10 times. You have 11 Josh Metelluses, and you can have a decent NFL defense. I mean, the line might not hold up forever, but he plays everywhere. He's a fun story right now. And I hope he gets another contract extension, because I think he's only up for another 2 years with the Vikings. But then who's the best listed out?
Chuck Foreman, fullback, running back,
rookie of the year. One of the first rookies of the year for the Vikings.
Rookie of the year. He got quite a few MVP votes in his second and third seasons, and he was a Pro Bowler the first 5 seasons, it looks like, with the Vikings. So yeah, really good career with the Vikings. Some of the stats that stick out to me, again, this is kind of before our time, but he had 1,000 rushing yards, over 1,000 rushing yards in 3 seasons from 75 to 77. He had he led the league in combined rushing and receiving touchdowns twice. his sophomore campaign in 74, and then 2 years later in 76.
Rushing and receiving?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yep. And I think he was a pretty effective receiver out of the backfield. He led the league in 75 in receptions, was 73.
Jeez.
So
that's wild. So obviously I've known Chuck Foreman to be a great player forever. He is one of the few guys that played in the early years of the Vikings that his name means something. You know, the Paul Krause, the Chuck Foreman, the Fran Tarkenton, the Mick Tingelhoffs. You know, there are some guys that we know about. When we were in high school, I got the chance to meet him. He was at like some Walmart event one time, and I rushed out and got a picture with him, and he signed one of my favorite Vikings mementos. I have a print of Fran Tarkenton either tossing a quick pass or handing off to Chuck Foreman, and I have Chuck Foreman's signature on that print, and it'll never happen, but I'd love to get Fran's signature on that same print. I almost need to carry it around and like just walk around wherever Fran lives.
There's Fran Tarkenton, sign this.
I think I would cry if I ever got that print signed by Fran Tarkenton, just to have both of them. But yeah, he's Chuck Foreman, great player, good personality too. He's actually a decent Twitter follow right now, even still today.
I think that picture of you and Chuck Foreman might need to make its way into the thumbnail for this video.
I was just thinking about that. Listeners, you'll know now already before you clicked on anything if that was the thumbnail. But I might have to make that happen because I do have pretty quick access to that Polaroid. However, I'm a weird looking high school kid. I think some of my family's in that picture too. We'll figure it out. We'll make something happen.
We can Photoshop some stuff if we need to.
we need to get good on Photoshop. If you've seen our thumbnails, you know we need to get good on Photoshop. Anyways, yeah, Chuck Foreman, great Viking, great 44. Yeah, we're about to enter a weird section of numbers, kind of the rest of the 40s, where there's some guys with decent Pro Football Reference value numbers, but guys I've never really heard of outside of one. Who's the best of 45, Ev?
Ed Schrockman, which is not a name that I know very well, and that's because he was on the first Vikings team ever in 1961. But he had a fumble recovery for 88 yards, which led the league, and a touchdown in 1962. One of the more notable stats there. He had a handful of interceptions pretty much every season. He played his whole career with the Vikings.
Yeah, he's a guy that right now with those numbers, like people would be buying his jersey. He would be getting a high free agency contract. And maybe he did in terms of the 70s and 60s, but really mostly the 60s. But yeah, I think he is the guy that in that group of, I'm glad they played, because if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have the NFL as we know it now. Like, every Viking should know that name, but it's unfortunate that I just saw his name for the first time today. And he's one of the better Vikings in team history, just based off of numbers.
Some other number 45s that stand out to me, Troy Dye.
Yeah, the current... Well, I don't know if he's currently on the team.
He might not be. I
think his contract expired at the end of last season. I might be wrong on that. Sorry, Troy, if I am. But yeah, a good special teams player, linebacker, drafted in 2020. I guess he started a few games, 8 games in his Vikings career, at least so far. I don't think the Vikings re-signed him.
He's with the Chargers.
Okay, all right. Well, following Eric Kendricks, whose name might come up later. But yeah, outside of... So there's Ed Schrockman and then someone named Tom Hannon, which I'm probably offending a lot of people here. Defensive back from the 70s and 80s. Another guy I'd never really figured out. He had 15 interceptions.
Those were kind of the dog days of being a Vikings fan, though. Like the 80s specifically were a rough decade.
The early 80s, yeah, for sure. 83, wasn't that the worst record in team history?
It might
at least tied for. But then outside of, Troy Dye, Scharakman and Hannon, those are the names. And even Dye, he's got an AV of 7. So, like, everybody else is less than half of that. So that's a number that if you can be better than a 1960s defensive back who had pretty good numbers, you can really own 45 for the Vikings.
The next number is even more sparse.
Yeah, this is a come get me number.
Yep.
If you can be better than Ursel McBee, who played for the Vikings from 65 to 69, what was he? A defensive back. If you can get more than 15 interceptions in your career, you will own number 46 for the Vikings. So come get it.
It's a good linebacker number.
Yeah.
I think if you're, I'm going to check the linebacker. Oh, yeah, 0 to 59.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're a linebacker and you're looking for a good number, 46.
I will argue with this Pro Football Reference rating scale right now. I will go ahead and say that Colin Leffler, long snapper for the Vikings, who has an AV of 21, which is half of Ursel McBee's AV. I will argue that Colin Leffler is the best Viking to wear number 46.
That's fair.
He was a long snapper for 11 seasons, and did we ever complain about him?
Nope.
I think we only ever, every once in a while, he'd have like some crazy awesome tackle on like a punt return or a punt play or whatever, but he might be Mr. Consistent for the Vikings. He did his job every time he was asked, and I don't even remember, was he just old? Did he just retire? Is that why he wasn't on the Vikings anymore?
I would expect so. He played 10 seasons.
Yeah. I think it went from Leffler to Connor McDermott.
Sounds right.
And yeah, I don't know if it was just, maybe it was just a camp battle that didn't go his way at the end of his career. At 33, so he played until he was 33, 34 years old. Colin Leffler, great Viking. Come on the pod. We'll welcome you on.
For sure. He was the long snapper of our kind of high school, college era of Vikings fanhood.
I'm not even lying. If Colin Leffler came on the podcast, that would be freaking awesome.
Would you fangirl a little bit?
Maybe a little bit. I don't know. Did I fangirl over Dustin Baker? That might be a similar thing.
A little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll work on Colin Leffler. I think he's got a social media preference.
47.
47. If it weren't for Joey Browner, this number would be wide open for anybody that wants to come get it. However, you're not going to be better than Joey Browner.
Nope.
Defensive back from 83 to 92, but with the Vikings through 91. I mean, what do you have?
He was a Pro Bowler 6 times. He was AP All-Pro 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 80s, early 90s, which weren't terrible years for the Vikings, but they weren't the best either. No. So he was a standout player in his era for sure. One of the better players on the roster.
Just looking at his numbers, I'm getting Harrison Smith vibes.
Yeah, for sure.
He's got 37 interceptions for the Vikings, which is that Harrison Smith. We can probably look it up.
I'll look it up.
He's probably got right around 36, 37 interceptions, and not that that's that's the flashy number. You know, that's the sacks for a defensive end. But yeah, Joey Browner and Harrison Smith might be very similar numbers wise.
Harrison currently has 34 interceptions.
Oh wow. Okay, so all right. Joey Browner, he is without question the best 47 in Vikings history. But if it weren't for that, you would have had to beat long snapper Kevin McDermott for the highest AV, which Kevin McDermott, 4 seasons with the Vikings, long snapper, again, only ever did his job. You can't complain about that.
I think the best thing about the Vikings to have worn number 47 are their names. Because you've got guys like Tough Borland. Wasn't he Australian?
I don't know. I'm hearing his name for the first. You might as well have just said Al Borland.
Oh, no, he wasn't. He's from Illinois. Sorry, Tough.
Yeah, that's pretty tough there.
But then there's another one from 2020, Hardy Nickerson. What a name. Hardy Nickerson.
And that's a modern name. That dude's still walking around. He's younger than us.
Yeah. So some cool names in number 47 history for the Vikings.
Yep.
What about 48?
48.
Matt Asiata wore that number.
Did he?
For a season, 2012, it looks like.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I always picture him in 44. So 48, the best they have listed is Najee Mustafa. And I guarantee I pronounced that at least not 100% right. But he's got a score of 24, which is okay. In the grand schemes of that AV score goes, you know, starter level, but definitely could lose their job to somebody better.
He had 10 picks for the Vikings, defensive back, 10 picks for 195 yards, 1 touchdown, and he had one for 97 yards in 1991.
Okay. But those 10 picks were all throughout 4 seasons, too. So,
yes.
I mean, that's, 10 picks more than I'll ever even dream of having myself. But
no, you're right, 4 seasons. He played for the Vikings for 5 seasons, but he didn't really have any notable stats in 1987. But it looks like he was a decent contributor on defense. Couple of picks every year from 88 to 93. Yep. And then he went to Oakland and didn't do anything. And looks like that's where his career came to an end.
Yep. So another number, come get it, come own it. When I say that, like come get it, come own it, I always think of Sharif Floyd, who was a defensive tackle who wore number 73 for the Vikings. And I think he wore number 73 at Florida as well. And something I just will never forget is he had some quote where he said, like, somebody asked him, why do you wear 73? Like, don't you want to wear a flashier number? I think even his rookie year with the Vikings, Sharif Floyd wore number 95 because 73 wasn't available. And he just said 73 is my number. Like, it was assigned to me at one point in like high school or college, and he had a coach that was like, hey, the number doesn't matter. You matter. You make the number. So that's the point where Sharif Floyd really just like owned a 73, which for a defensive tackle is not the flashiest of numbers. So be a running back or a linebacker or defensive back or whatever and just own number 48, and you can have that. It'll get retired. Like you can be the best ever to wear 48 for the Vikings.
49, pretty similar. In fact, I'm looking at this list and I don't know any of these names on the list for number 49, and part of that's just because I'm too young probably to know any of these.
Dale Hackbart.
Yeah, Dale Hackbart is the best with an AV of 30. Played from 66 to 70. He was a defensive back. Looks like he bounced around the league quite a bit, especially in his early years. He was all over the place. Green Bay, Washington, then the Vikings, then St. Louis, then Denver to end his career. So he bounced around quite a bit.
I just noticed if you are on profootballreference.com and you click a certain player, it'll show you their stats by year. And one of the stats they show you is their AV for that year.
Yeah.
So we won't change anything on our list here, but we could have averaged it out for like all their Vikings years and had a more accurate number. So who is it? Dale Hackbart had an AV of his career for 30.
With the Vikings.
No, of his total career for 30.
Oh.
But with the Vikings, his highest was like 8. So, and none of his other years even came close to 30. So I don't know how that's all calculated.
And I don't know how it's calculated either, because if you go down to the bottom here where it says 5 years with the Vikings and it kind of sums all of his stats with the Vikings, then his AV with the Vikings is 30.
Maybe the list we're going off is accurate to their Vikings time then. Because it does break it down for other teams too. Anyways,
I see a 30 on this. Oh yeah, he is.
Yeah.
So look at us. We're just figuring out.
Look at us.
All of this while we go. Skol.
Skol. Hey, thank you for being with us. Still, this is awesome.
Let's keep moving on. We've got 9 more numbers to go.
All right. Here, I say we blow past. We just quickly go through these numbers through the 50s, really. And if we can think of a player that isn't the best or isn't listed, or if it is the best, then we can talk about him for a minute. Because like Jim Hougf, Hougf, number 51, he's not who I would say is the best 51 for the Vikings, just because he played from 78 to 86, right before we were born. My best 51 is Ben Lieber.
We're still on 50.
Oh, son of a gun.
Hang on. Don't get ahead of yourself.
Well, you know what? Hey, we can clip that. We'll just we'll move that audio file right there. So 50.
50.
What do you think of?
The best one per Pro Football Reference in their AV ranking is Jeff Simon. He was a linebacker in the 70s, early 70s to early 80s, mostly middle linebacker. Yep. Looks like he was pretty decent, Pro Bowler 4 times, and got some Defensive Rookie of the Year votes his rookie year. So
AV of 78, that's good. That's buy your kid his jersey worth of numbers. Like that's good.
There are some other just interesting names. This is a longer list. Number 50 is Pete Bursich.
Yeah, which you may know his name more for the Vikings Entertainment Network. He is the color guy for Paul Allen on the radio for KFAN during Vikings games. Yeah, good guy. I like him a lot. He's the guy that goes whoa during the Minneapolis Miracle replay. Go check that out. Well, we'll link that maybe somewhere.
I want to clip that part of you doing that.
I was trying not to yell, but
yeah, my kids are sleeping. Don't wake them up. Come on.
I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna. but yeah, another name, Aaron Henderson, whose brother EJ, they played together for the Vikings for a while. Aaron is still pretty active on social media. I'm trying to think other names for this list.
Gerald Hodges had a year or two there for the Vikings where he was decent. Mm-hmm. So
Vinny Churchu, I think he came in the same time Ben Lieber did, free agents wise, but he only played for 1 year. So yeah,
a little bit of a longer list for 50. All right, 51 though.
51, I already said all I can say. It's not, for me, it's not Jim Hougf, which I'm very sorry. He's got an AV of 42, which is respectable numbers. Granted, I know that my AV is like negative 40 billion. So, but as far as compared to everybody else, 42 is pretty decent. Some people remember him. Please let us know. Comment if you remember him. Comment if you are him. That'd be cool. He can be on the pod.
Jim was a center and a guard, mostly left guard. Played all of his career with the Vikings from 78 to 86. So before our time. And center guard, that's just a really hard position to really statisfy.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. When I was typing things out, I thought he was an inside lineman. So, I don't know, maybe he bounced around a little bit.
But I would agree with you. Ben Lieber, for sure.
Me, it's Ben Lieber.
Gets my vote. And part of that's just because he's in a more statistically friendly position. But
also, he's more visible to us, even since maybe even more since he retired. I hear him all the time on the Power Trip on KFAN.
Yep.
I follow him on Twitter. We watch his post game.
He's part of the Vikings Entertainment Network.
He is
very much involved with the team still.
Yeah, I mean this as a compliment. He is as entertaining and talented of a personality in media as he ever was a linebacker in the NFL.
He's a level-headed, very football knowledgeable commentary.
Yep.
And I appreciate that, especially in those post-game. That's really where I watch him the most, is those post-game recaps. It's usually him and one other Vikings Entertainment Network staffer down on the field, wherever they play. They travel with the team everywhere, and they just recap everything, and he kind of gives his hot take on what happened. And it's trustworthy because he's so
he may be good. One of the most, as far as former players in the league goes, he's one of the people that trust and respect his opinion are the two words that come to mind quickly, but I guess it is trust. If he says something, I'm gonna be like, hey, maybe I didn't think of that, but Ben Lieber said it, and maybe that is how things go in the locker room, or maybe that is how coaches talk to stuff like anything he says, and be like, all right, hey, Ben said it, I trust that. Like, I'll respect whatever he said. He's been on Vikes Now with Dustin Baker a couple of times in the last few years. That's talk about fangirl. I would love it if we ever got him on the Skol Hop, and
that would be fun.
Yeah, it's an itch enough that, hey, I'm throwing it out. Ben Lieber, come on the show. We'd love to talk about '09, the way Meat Sauce makes fun of you about that pass interference call. We'd also love to talk about actually like how good of a football player you were and how good of a media presence you are now. So come on, please, come on our lowly show. We'd love it.
Number 52 is kind of a repeat.
I can't really think of anybody that that would be the best ever. So this is one where I agree with Pro Football Reference on who they say is the best ever Viking to wear 52 and who I would say immediately. Who is it, Ev?
Chad Greenway.
Chad freaking Greenway.
100%.
I think he wore number 18 with the Hawkeyes. And that'd be a fun question to ask him if he came in the league right now, or if when he came in, if the number rules were the same as they are right now, would he have continued with 18? Because he couldn't wear 18 when he got drafted. It wasn't allowed. But that would have been pretty sick. I don't know when he was drafted who wore that number, if he would have had to compete for it. But yeah, Chad Greenway, great Viking.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously we're a little more biased because we're from Iowa and he played for Iowa, and like just to see him kind of go from just an hour down the road to playing for our favorite football team and playing really well for our favorite football team for his entire career. Yeah, he's a dude.
I think he's also, and I respect this, he's pretty proud of the fact that he was able to play for the Vikings his whole career. I've heard him say a few times, because there was one time he was franchise tagged, which he's one of the few players I've heard say, like, I loved it because I was guaranteed X amount of dollars. Like, I'm sure on some level he didn't love it, but at least publicly he said he loved being franchise tagged. But yeah, we've said it a few times before, guys that love being Vikings, Harrison Smith comes to mind, Jim Kleinsasser, maybe even Dalton Reisner. Those guys love being Vikings, and I definitely group Chad Greenway into that. He seemed to love being a Viking and being in Minnesota. I think he still lives there today.
Yeah. Not a ton of like super notable names on the 52 list. Some names before our time that we would probably like get flack from the older generation for not for mentioning, not knowing, yeah. Like Dennis Johnson, Kylie Wong,
okay,
who apparently played for them during the 98 season.
I was going to say, that name kind of sounds familiar.
Henry Crockett sounds familiar from the 02-03 season.
Okay. After that, though, it's a huge, starting with Henry Crockett, it's a huge drop off from the top three names.
Yep.
I would say that outside of Chad Greenway, that's another number you can come and own. But I mean, you'd have to be a Hall of Fame type player to usurp Greenway for the best to ever wear 52 for the Vikings.
What about 53?
Talk about Hall of Fame type players. This guy, a handful of episodes ago, I was surprised that this guy was undrafted. I didn't know until somewhat recently. Mick Tingelhoff, center, number 53. He was the first guy to wear that number for the Vikings. He only ever played for the Vikings, and he only ever wore that number. He played from 62 to 78. He's a Hall of Famer. He was Fran Tarkenton's center. And they retired his number justifiably. Although I was surprised to learn today, I think I told you earlier, they didn't retire his number until like 20-some years after he retired from playing. Which was, I feel like that's not how it goes anymore. Like, if you're worthy of having your number retired, pretty much as soon as you retire from playing, they just retire your number. Unless your name is Randy Moss, which apparently the Vikings are never going to retire 84. Anyways. Mick Tingelhoff, I don't think there's any question, the best 53 of all time for the Vikings, maybe the best 53 of all time in the NFL. Yeah, I would proudly wear his jersey.
The last person to wear that wore it in 99.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy that they let that number.
Kivusama Mays.
And I don't know
98 to 99.
him,
I don't know anything about him either, but that's the last time anybody will wear the number 53 in purple.
Yeah, and good for it.
Yep. What about 54?
54, there's probably a handful of decent linebackers on there. The best on the list is linebacker Fred McNeil, played from 74 to 85, so 12 years. I had never really known his name, but if you had asked me, I'd say Eric Kendricks, and that's Pro Football Reference agrees as far as he's right there. Kendricks has a score of 65, McNeil has a score of 69, so they're very close. Mm-hmm. I'd still give the nod to Kendricks. He played for 7 seasons with the Vikings, and was undersized and played oversized every play of his career. So for me, it's Eric Kendricks.
Anthony Barr actually wore that last year. When he came back.
Which was fun, but still.
It was weird not to call him Eric Kendricks because you saw 54 running around and you're like, wait, that's not Eric. That's Anthony Barr.
Yep. All right, we got a few more, 3 heavy hitters here between 55 and 59. So 55, the best ever listed is Scott Studwell, who basically spent, up until a couple of years ago, his entire adult life with the Minnesota Vikings organization. Played on the team from 77 to 90. He's got an AV of 91, and he's one of the few players on this list that has a score higher than 90. There's only 4 of them on this list. Mick Tingelhoff's the only other one we've talked about so far that have a score above 90. He was just consistent for many, 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 many years. And then after he retired, he joined the organization. I don't know how soon after he retired, but pretty soon. He joined the organization in the scouting area, and he helped shape the Vikings roster up until a year or 2 or 3 ago. He's been with the Vikings forever.
Yep. Some other good ones to wear 55. Anthony Barr, of course, we just mentioned him.
Yeah.
Wore 54 in the 23 season, but wore 55 for most of his career and the most notable years of his career, I would say, with the Vikings.
Mm-hmm. Then we've got Jack Del Rio, who you may know him as a coach.
Went on to coach, yeah.
Probably most people know him as a coach, but he played for the Vikings for 4 years, from 92 to 95. He wore 55. He kind of bounced around a little bit. He's definitely more accomplished as a coach than he was as a player, but he was a decent player. Mm-hmm. Total career AV score of 71, which is pretty darn good.
Zadarius Smith wore that number for a handful of games in 2002 or 22. Sorry.
I think he ended up being healthy for all of the games that year that he was with the Vikings.
He was fun to watch in a Vikings uniform.
He was really fun for the first half of that season.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if it was a combination of injury or what, but he kind of dropped off. But yeah, still very fun.
All right, moving on. 56.
So Pete Bursich wore 56 for most of his career with the Vikings, which is why I was a little surprised earlier when we talked about number 50. Bursich switched to 50 in the, 2000 season? Or the 99 season?
No, it was before that. 95 to 98.
Really?
Let's double check that.
Yeah.
But
so it lists the numbers they wore after their position.
56, 95 through 98, and then he switched to 50 in 2000.
Yeah, so Bursich wasn't on the team in 99 or missed it. For whatever reason, it's missing from the Pro Football Reference. Anyways, Bursich wore 56 for most of his Vikings career, except for that 2000 season. Otherwise, it's hands down. Here's the third guy with a score above 90, Chris Dolman.
Yeah.
He's got an AV score of 111. Played for the Vikings from 85 to 93, and then again in 1999. For a while, he was one of the highest sack leaders in NFL history.
Led the league in sacks in 1989.
He's a Hall of Famer, 8 Pro Bowls, a good Viking, and I think he sadly passed away just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's absolutely the best. Other ones might be E.J. Henderson, comes to mind. Currently, it's Garrett Bradbury, but I don't think he's the best. He's just pretty good. Yeah,
56. It's a good number.
57. Come get it. The best listed is Mike Merriweather, who played from 89 to 92. He's got a score of 33. So come get it. If you can be a few-time Pro Bowler and maybe even sign a second contract, you're probably better than who might be a good dude, Mike Merriweather. So, yeah, 57.
Dwayne Rudd from the late 90s was another 57. Audi Cole.
Oh, yeah. I remember Audi Cole. He had back-to-back pick sixes in the preseason one time. That was a lot of fun.
But yeah, that's definitely a number that somebody could come get if they wanted it. What about 58?
All right, Pro Football Reference, this guy has a score of 89. He played for the Vikings from 68 to 79. I had never heard his name before today. Wally Hilgenberg. So I'm sorry I've never heard your name. I would probably have your jersey if it was today. But it was just before my time.
He's a long-time Viking. He spent 12 years with Minnesota.
Yeah.
And not a huge contributor on defense as a linebacker, but good enough. They don't. I wonder if they didn't record tackles as a stat, because he's a linebacker here, which you would think, okay, he was involved in a lot of tackles, but he only has interceptions and fumbles, sacks and safeties as the main stat categories.
Well, and sacks weren't even official stat until like 82.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. But he has a sack recorded in a handful of seasons in the mid-60s. Which is interesting. It says official since 82, based on play-by-play game film and other research since 1960. So it sounds like Pro Football Reference maybe kind of fills in the blanks a little bit.
Kind of gone back a little bit
with sacks. But anyways, yeah, reasonably good Viking for sure.
Sure. All right. Last but not least, and one of the best Vikings on the list. Here's the fourth guy above a 90 score with a 93 score. Played for the Vikings from 74 to 85. Linebacker Matt Blair.
Matt Blair.
Yeah.
Yep. I've definitely heard the name, but couldn't begin to tell you, other than looking at Pro Football Reference, how good he was. Pro Football Reference has him as a Pro Bowler for 6 seasons.
Nice.
So, and the Pro Bowl meant a whole lot more back in the 70s and 80s than it does today. So that's kind of cool.
I feel like being voted a Pro Bowler is still a high honor today, but it's still a popularity contest.
It's a lot different today.
They need to figure out that math equation.
Agreed. But yeah, he had some good years for the Vikings. Had a handful of interceptions every year. Forced some fumbles, or was involved in some fumbles. Had a few sacks here and there. So
yeah, very
nicely
good.
done. Yeah,
and that's it. That's 40 to 59. Did you think we missed anybody? Do you remember watching any of these players that we just totally skated over? Do you wish we would have mentioned somebody else? Let us know. How can they let us know?
You can send us a message. You can drop a comment. You could, if you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment there.
We have a stat guy.
We do, yeah.
What's his name again?
Dennis.
Dennis,
I think.
Hey, Dennis, we need you to correct all our incorrect stats.
Yeah. So Dennis or anyone else out there, if you have more knowledge than we do, yeah,
let us know.
Let us know. We'd be more than happy to correct ourselves and acknowledge you as the one that has more knowledge than us.
Absolutely.
Next week, we're going to cover numbers 60 through 79.
Yeah, so let us know if you can think of the best to play for the Vikings, to wear anyone in those number ranges. Hopefully we'll be talking to Dustin Baker, so keep tuned in for that, and we'll kind of ask him. We won't go through every number with him, but we might ask him who he thinks the best Vikings are to play wearing that range of numbers. So it'll be interesting. He saw a different age of Vikings. Slightly. He's only a little bit older than us, but he definitely saw some more Vikings to wear those numbers than we did. So that'll be a lot of fun. So yeah.
There you go. All right,
man. Good beer.
Yet.
Best episode yet. Skol.
Hey Vikings fans, Evan here from the Skol Hop, and we just wanted to say thank you again so much for listening to the Skol Hop, and we also wanted to take one more opportunity to let you know that this episode of the Skol Hop has been brought to you by Big Top Ventures. If you're considering taking an all-inclusive trip to either Mexico or Jamaica, reach out to our friends at Big Top Ventures at bigtopventuresllc@gmail.com. Once again, that's bigtopventuresllc@gmail.com. You can get the lowest rate possible on several all-inclusive resorts throughout the region. Big Top Ventures. Step right up to your next big adventure. And thanks again for listening to the Skol Hop. Skol.